We've got about 3 installments left of our series. In the next 2 weeks, if you've got a question or you've got a topic or there's unfinished business that you'd like us to visit or revisit, I'd welcome you to send me a message either on Facebook or email or send it to the church or something like that. The 28th, I won't be here. I'm speaking at Exposure. There's a big youth camp that takes place at the Civic Center, and they've asked me to spend the day over there doing some classes and then to speak at the evening event. So we'll actually only have the 3 sessions before the 28th to conclude at least my part of the class. And I think, and this is not official, I think in the spring I'm going to do a series in the small auditorium on spiritual beings. I've had a lot of requests to revisit some of that material. The old goats have wanted me to come in and do that, and I've kind of delayed doing that for various reasons. And so Ben called me and asked would I do that series. So we'll be doing a little talk about spiritual beings, angels, demons, deacons, all those things that you deal with in the church. And that'll take place after we start our semester the first of the year. So let me introduce you to a term or ask you what you know about this term, and then we'll kind of jump off from there. Has anybody ever heard the term diffuse physiological arousal? Someone in the hall may have. So DPA, diffuse physiological arousal, is this idea that if in a marriage session or if I'm sitting as a therapist and I were to put a blood pressure cuff or a pulse oximeter or something on a couple and measure their physiological reactions to how they interact in conflict. There's been some real interesting studies done on that. I know a lot of guys that I read from, they do that as part of their practices. There's some kind of weirdness in Alabama about practicing medicine without a license, and that I don't fool with that. And so, but the idea is that when you start in a conflict or you start talking to someone and you get overheated or you get overstimulated and your heartbeat in a conflict. So, I'm talking to the elders about the budget, or the elders are talking to me about my budget or whatever. And one of our heart rates goes above 100 beats a minute. When you go past 100 beats a minute, you move from the forebrain into the midbrain. And in that stage of your brain, you're about as complicated and about as sophisticated as a goat. And so you're not doing a lot of logical, active work. And the guys that have been studying how our bodies respond when we're in conflict with other people have stated that there is a 1 correlation between diffuse physiological arousal and divorce. Now, can any of my engineer friends explain to me about the strength of correlations? What does a correlation mean? We often confuse correlation and causation, by the way. Is it walking under a ladder bad luck? No, it's stupid. But we have taken that there's a correlation. When you walk under a ladder, stuff falls on you, to say that it's causes. If I walk under a ladder, I create bad luck. No, I've made a bad decision, and I'll get the consequences of those decisions. But when you start looking at, hey, if this, can I predict this? The strongest correlation you can have is a 1. Diffuse physiological arousal and divorce has a correlation of 0.9. So when I'm discussing things with my spouse or my spouse is discussing things with me and I let my physiological responses to that, my blood pressure go up, my heart rate increase, tension in my muscles, and it feels like I'm in a fight or flight kind of a situation, then I'm not managing my physiological responses very healthily, and that is a predictor of divorce. And so we want to talk about how when we interact with one another, whether or not we resist our spouse having any influence or whether we accept influence. And I'll just read you some of the things. And by the way, full disclosure, I had oral surgery this morning. I broke a tooth off at the gum line, and they said they're going to have to cut it out because it's close to my sinuses or something. And my wife said I shouldn't teach class tonight. But I ignored her influence and came to class. So if I say something just utterly weird, it's the hydrocodone and it's not me. And so we'll just have a good time. I'm thinking about trying to make an episode of the podcast and call it Keeping Up with Jones, the Lonnie Jones Percocet Adventure. and just kind of free, Jackie's gone, I've got a hot mic, let's see what happens. But I did accept her influence and didn't cut that episode. So here's some quotes. The happiest, most stable marriages in the long run are where the husband treated his wife with respect and did not resist power sharing or decision making with her. Now, what do we mean by that? What does it mean that husbands don't resist decision making and power sharing? Say that again, now that the WWE is finished. Okay, hey, I don't have to be in charge. I don't have to make all decisions in order, number one, to be a man, and in order, number two, to be in charge of my own household. Okay? Somebody else. Okay, so it implies a lot of trust. The man has a lot of great trust in his wife and values her input, values her intelligence, values the fact that she's a partner in this relationship. Somebody else or anything else. So tell me what is your impression of biblical submission when it comes to the husband and the wife dynamic? And I know I just took a bat to a bee's nest, so but blame it on the pain medicine. So you get a husband and wife dynamic of submission, you get a biblical dynamic of mutual submission, and then you do have, some things that are pretty well laid out, that the husband is the head of the wife and that kind of stuff. It's interesting, and as you read about submission, and Jackie and I are studying that together because we're both teaching out of 1 Peter, is that a lot of the preconceived ideas about what was authoritative in the Jewish religion came out of the Mishnah rather than the covenant. And so we've superimposed some models of submission based on some things that our culture from the 40s, 50s, and 60s kind of bled in, and we've interpreted some of these biblical passages. When you read passages about the husband and the wife being the caretaker of the home, and the husband treating the slaves like Jesus would treat them, or even if you're a slave, those are common first century codes. If you just could go down to the local bookshop in the first century and say how to run your household, you'd find the husband is kind of the guy that goes out and makes the living, makes the business decisions, but the wife was the manager at the home, and she was in charge of servants and children and education and entertaining and all those kinds of things. And so when Paul or Peter, either one, writes about these dynamics between husbands and wives, he takes a Roman or a Greek code and basically rubber stamps it, but then adds to it. And by the way, husbands, love your wives. Husbands, don't be harsh with your wives. Fathers, don't provoke your children to anger. And so when you read the New Testament in these areas, the New Testament writers were somewhat radical compared to their normal culture because they gave women a lot of power, not that the first century didn't give them, but that the first century church leaders didn't give them, the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the scribes. They had kind of taken away what the Proverbs 31 woman would have done in the Old Testament, and the women stayed at home. They wore veils. They couldn't go outside. They couldn't speak to other men. They couldn't be caught alone talking with a man, and it was very, very oppressive based on their interpretation of the old law rather than what the old law actually taught about the rights and the rules of women. So when you get to the place where you say, hey, you need to be in a position where you allow your wife to influence your decision making, that's actually more New Testament accurate than some of the things like, when we were growing up, I was born in the 60s, and, it was the dad makes all the decisions, and dad's in charge, and, a lot of the men come home and sit in their Papa Bear chair, and mom fixed dinner and took care of all the kids' stuff, and the guys weren't involved in the day-to-day activities with the children or even with the spouse. And so when you start talking about allowing your spouse to be a source of influence, that tends to be more biblically accurate, and it also is a way for the house to be more successful. What's one of the qualifications for elders? Husband of one wife. Hospitable. What's that? Not ruling his house well. But when you talk about all the personal things, then you get into he's got to have a certain kind of children, and he's got to have a certain kind of what? A certain kind of wife. So when you start thinking about the biblical mandate for how elders' households are supposed to look and for how elders' households are supposed to run, you've got this thing that says if your wife doesn't have a certain kind of character, she can disqualify you from being an elder. Does that sound like the wife was supposed to have influence in the home of a New Testament Christian? Yes, no, nod, dog in the dash. Yeah, and so this idea that these households were more successful because they allowed for the influence of the wife. And then, look at the examples in the Bible where women were people of influence. Name me some influential women. Esther. Okay. Lydia. The Proverbs 31 woman doesn't actually have a name, but she's got a resume. All right. Who else? Dorcas, Mary. When Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and favor with God and favor with man, that's after he left temple. He left the experts. He left the doctors and the lawyers and the child psychologists, and he went home with a 26-year-old Jewish girl and an obscure Jewish carpenter. And so lots of influence from the female part that I think sometimes we miss when we start studying the ideas of submission and governing our houses or being in charge of our houses. When your wife offers you influence, whether it's I don't think you should do it this way, or I think it would look better if you did it this way, or I think we need to revisit this. When your wife offers you influence and you respond with one or more of what we call the four horsemen of the relationship apocalypse. Now, I don't know that we've used that term a lot. I refer to it. Can anybody remember the four horsemen of the relationship apocalypse? Contempt is number one. And so if you offer me a suggestion about how I'm driving, or about how I'm hanging this picture, or about how I'm doing the dishes, or how I'm putting the dishes up, and you give me some suggestion and I respond to you with contempt, then what have I done to your ability to give me influence? Yeah, you basically said, I don't need or want your opinion, and your opinion is not valuable, and I may have insulted your value. I may have even insulted your intelligence. So, contempt. Now, in the dynamic of the four horsemen, when somebody deals with you with contempt, what's your natural response to contempt? What's that? Yeah, you send them contempt right back, often in the form of a defensive action. So contempt leads to being defensive, and defensive is I'm right, you're wrong, I win, you lose, I'm happy, you're sad. Or if I'm actually guilty of something, but you bring it up and I don't want to hear it, it assaults my pride or it offends my ego, and I respond with minimization, it's not that big a deal. If I respond with denial, I really didn't do that, you shouldn't be upset about it. Or I respond to it with blame. Well, the only reason I act this way is because you act this way. If you receive influence from your spouse and you respond with contempt or defensiveness, then you're undergirding the foundation of the communication and the relationship. The other two horsemen are negativity, where I only focus about the things that, well, I can't believe you got on to me about this, let me tell you all the things you're doing wrong. Or stonewalling, where I just put down the blast shields and I'm not going to have any interaction. I'm not going to entertain the fact that you could be right, and I'm not going to entertain the fact that I could be wrong. So responding to contempt with any of the four horsemen exacerbates the situation. Responding with any of the four horsemen is the opposite of acknowledging your spouse's feelings and drowns her out and obliterates her point of view. Now, what happens when you obliterate the other person's point of view? Anybody show me the two famous Lonnie Jones hand signals? Show me the hand signal for cognitive dissonance. All right? What's the other Lonnie Jones hand signal? It's where communication should be like this, but it goes like this. Okay? This is how communication should be. I should be able not understand me, but let me demonstrate that I understand you. When I respond to your attempt to influence me in a negative way, contemptuously, defensively, negative, or stonewalling, what I do is I take the ability to demonstrate that I can attune to you, and I like the way they worded it, I obliterate it. It's not that I damage it, it's not that I bother it. This is nuke, mushroom cloud, that kind of stuff. And so failure to accept influence obliterates the other person feeling understood, and it means I'm intolerant of a viewpoint that is different than mine. And so we get back to this word attunement. And this is my symbol for attunement. I don't know where I got it, but that's attunement. And if you understand attunement, the A in attune is acknowledge the other person's emotions. So I recognize that you're either mad, sad, glad, disappointed. I acknowledge the fact that you have a point of view. The T in attunement stands for turn toward them instead of turn away from them. The second T in attune says that I tolerate a viewpoint that is opposite of mine. I don't have to agree with it. I don't have to think it's reasonable or rational, but I at least have to entertain it. I have to understand that it's in the room and we should probably see it from your perspective, and then demonstrate understanding. What you're telling me in this situation is you think it would be best, you think it would be better, you don't think this is a good idea. And a lot of times wives feel unheard, they feel misunderstood, and they feel rejected. Now, are those trigger words for anybody? Anybody kind of go, hey, that describes some of the way I feel about stuff? You ever offered, I'm getting some nods. I'm not getting anybody raising hands and commenting on them, but I'm getting some nods, okay? So, here I am. I'm in this relationship, and we're supposed to have this two becomes one, but there's only one person's opinion that matters. There's only one person's viewpoint that matters. There's only one person's value system that matters. And all of a sudden the wife says, hey, I offered these perspectives or I offer these guidances, and I feel unheard. He's not listening to me at all. And then when he does listen, or he says he listens, I don't think he understands what I'm trying to say, or at least he doesn't demonstrate that he understands it, and then he rejects it. He just out and out says, well, that's dumb. We're not going to do it that way, and I won't accept any influence there. Do you see how if that occurs during conflict, what happens to the conflict there? What did you say, Jackie? Okay, so you get that stonewalling. Well, I'm not going to waste my time. I'm not going to waste my breath. Or I'm not going to waste my energy. Now, what happens if I can't ever be heard? You quit talking. And then you figure out that, this couple's been married 20 years, and the husband has been living in blissful ignorance, thinking everybody's happy, and she walks in one day and says, I'm done, I can't take this anymore. And he's like, where'd this come from? Well, it came from 20 years of her trying to tell you stuff, and you throwing it out the window or putting up a big blast shield and not letting it come in. And so it obliterates her ability to be understood. It obliterates the idea of the fact that she has a valued part in this relationship. And it really undermines the idea that we're partners in this thing. And, two becoming one. What is the old King James Version? When God created the woman, I'm going to make what for the man? A helpmeet. Now, understand that is a noun and an adjective. It's not just a noun. Okay, you're not a helpmeet. That's not a word. It's not a real word. It's a help that is meet, a help that is compatible, a help that is comparable, a help that fits. And so the man and the woman, even in the beginning, were a partnership. And if you erode that partnership by not accepting influence from your spouse, you've disenfranchised them. You've made them feel like a second-class citizen. You made them feel stupid. You made them feel uneducated. You made them feel unimportant. And at some point, like Jackie said, they roll their eyes and go, well, I'm not going to beat my head against the wall on this. I'm going to not try to be an influence. And by the way, once you can't influence me, what happens to my ability to influence you? Yeah, it's strangled. It goes away too. So the idea that part of submission is out of the same dynamic that I have to get along with God in Christ, I've got to have lowliness of mind, I've got to humility in spirit, I've got to be gentle, and I've got to value you in such a way that what you say has the ability, if not to influence me, at least you know that I consider what you say and I put some kind of value on it. You ever met anybody who felt like their spouse didn't value them? What does that look like? It's ugly. They're divorced. Anything else? So they're uncomfortable hanging out with each other. Yeah, and either place where the other person is unvalued or unappreciated or treated like a second-class citizen or treated like they're dumb, you don't want to eat dinner with those folks. You want to take long car trips with folks like that. Vicarious embarrassment. It's that, I can't, yeah. I've got to confess, I like to watch the tryouts for American Idol because these people don't have friends. Oh yeah, you can sing, get on TV nationally and prove it, No, that's, and there's this evil, wicked little part of me that likes to see that, when they can't really sing or they can't really dance. And I don't know why. I guess it's because I can't sing and I've always known I couldn't sing, so I just belt it out there and live with it. But but with a couple, you're having dinner with somebody and they start this interaction, or you're on a road trip or you're vacationing with them and they start this. It is miserable to be around folks like that. Now, think about living with somebody like that. And then from the idea that the husband doesn't understand, hey, it's biblically okay to accept influence from my wife, but he's ignored her and shut her down for years, and then she finally rolled her eyes and quit trying, and then out of the blue, 20, 25 years later, the kids have left home, and she says, I'm done with this. I'm tired of being treated with contempt. I'm tired of being oppressed. I'm tired. And you'll hear, I'm oppressed. I'm emotionally abused. I'm psychologically abused. And if you wrote it down, it wouldn't look like it on paper. It wouldn't sound like real abuse. But after years and years and years of this, that's how it gets translated to the other person. So you end up with this dynamic that is not only terrible, but they call it a cascade into negativity. And then you have that one-to-one correlation, or that correlation number that says when we're talking and I treat you contemptuously, you get into diffuse physiological arousal. The heart, almost like you're in a fight. And so that's a correlation with divorce. So accepting influence does certain things. Number one, it heightens the positive in your relationship. So regardless of what's going on in your relationship, when you allow influence from your spouse to be something that you value, and even if you don't agree with it, you tolerate it and you legitimize it and you demonstrate, this is what I heard you say, it heightens your ability to view positives in your relationship, and so you're looking more toward the positive than just the negative. Number two, it strengthens friendship by bonding and deepening your love maps. Now, you think about the couples you know that seem to have really, really, really strong friendships. Anybody come to mind? With each other, yes. That's okay. Yeah, I may not be communicating as well as I think I am. It may be one of those things. Yeah, I know a couple has really, really strong relationships outside their thing, and they're divorced as soon as. So you've got this couple, and you look at them, and they're not just Twitter-pated, they're not just in limerence, they're not infatuated, but these people legitimately like each other, they legitimately value each other's intelligence, they legitimately value each other's opinion. You recognize that this has a deepening effect on their friendship. True or false? Okay, so that as you watch them interact, it's a true partnership to become one, not this one-sided thing sometimes that I think we've thought that marriage is supposed to look like. And not only does it strengthen the friendships, it also deepens the love maps. I know what Jackie's opinion is about certain things. I know what her value system is on certain things. I know that in some cases, she sees it this way and I see it that way. But the simple fact that we feel like we understand each other is an idea that we know each other very, very well. And how many couples do you know that have been married, say longer than 20 years, and they say, I really don't know my spouse anymore? You ever run into anybody like that? It's an occupational hazard where I work. People have been married, and they say, we invested our time in raising the kids, we invested our time into accruing, a good job and a good salary, but now that the kids are gone, our house is empty, and I don't know this person. And a lot of it you'll find out is because they haven't accepted or offered influence with each other. And then if I value you as a partner, and I value your education, I value your experience, or I just value your common sense, what happens is that it builds fondness and admiration. Now, if I'm building this bank account where you feel like that I'm fond of you and I admire you. Now, you notice if I reject your opinion and if I reject your influence, what does that say about admiration? Okay, you ever been treated by somebody like they thought you're an idiot? Do you feel like that person admires you? Do you feel like that person is fond of you? I've gone in and offered some things for business stuff, and it'd be like, nah, we're not interested in that. I tried to build a ropes course at Camp Naoti and at Madison Academy 20 years before I ever built my first ropes course, and everybody was like, no thanks, have a good day. And then you just felt like, well, this idea that I had was stupid, or this idea that I had was worthless, or this idea wouldn't work. And then when somebody else comes along and says, hey, we've got a piece of property, and we'd love to do this. We don't really know what this is, but we'd love to do it and want you to do it. Hey, that's a pretty good feeling. Well, think about living with somebody that makes you feel rejected or unappreciated all the time. It doesn't bolster the fondness, it doesn't bolster the admiration, and it doesn't bolster a sense of friendship. And now, if I feel like that I'm valued and my friendship is valuable and my ideas are valuable, when something comes up, do I tend to turn away from you or do I tend to turn towards you? So if I don't feel valued, then the strength of the relationship is being degraded on a pretty daily basis, because what I think, what I feel, what I know doesn't matter. And if I'm not sharing ideas and thoughts and insights with you, who will I share them with? Okay, so Susan says when that thing is a gap and it's left open, and there's somebody that will listen to you, value them, and entertain their ideas, that's a person that you not only talk to, but you talk to regularly and you talk to repeatedly. If you read The Anatomy of an Affair in the book, Not Just Friends by Shirley Glass, you'll find out that affairs don't take place like they did in the 50s and the 60s, where you've got the powerful rich boss and the menial labor secretary, and there's just this sexual friction between them. No, it's, hey, I stood in line for 7 hours to get a coffee at lunch, and the little girl behind the counter said, hey, how's your work going? And I said, well, it's not going good. What do they do to you? And you end up talking 10 minutes. You talk 10 minutes every day. You talk 10 minutes every day for a month. Hey, if you'll come in tomorrow closer to noon, I'll take my lunch break and we'll sit and talk. And it doesn't have to be this nefarious sexual lust. It's somebody listened to you. And you feel like that you're smart, you're appreciated, you're intelligent around that other person. I deal with couples who are in trouble and who are divorcing a lot. People don't come to my office to tell me good news. I wish it was different, but it's one of those things. But when they come in, it'll be, hey, I've exchanged 1,500 text messages this month with this person. I spent this much time messaging them on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or Snapchat or whatever. People who are dealing with the divorce and they've got the attorneys involved and they've subpoenaed the phone records, and you see the same phone number, for 17 pages. And it's simply the fact that, hey, here's somebody who'll listen to me. Here's somebody who'll take my opinion. Here's somebody who'll validate my feelings or my ideas or my intelligence or just the fact that I've got common sense. So it's super, super important to emphasize that as husbands specifically. Now, this cuts both ways, but the research is very male specific. That it's our job to let our wives know that they have influence in our thought decisions and in our thought processes and our problem solving and our decision making. And if we don't, then we devalue their ability to feel connected to us. And I thought that was super interesting in some of the research that I'd read. So now, if you don't create this motion in your house, then you're failing to create what we call attunement. And attunement is simply the idea that you know that I know your thoughts, your dreams, your hopes, and your values, and it allows us as a couple to create what's known as shared meaning. Now, what do we mean by shared meaning? Let's talk about your business. What is the goal of your company? Why do you do what you do at your company? And there are some of you in here who go, to get paid. Yes. And then there's some of you who go, well, I get paid to help people solve these problems. I get paid to create these things. I get paid to share this service. You see how one of those is just a job and one of those is kind of a passion? So shared meaning in a relationship. What is it that you guys share that gives you meaning and purpose? What is it that you're partners in? And if you don't create a shared meaning, then you really don't have anything to bond you together in a tighter place. Somebody tell me some things that could be shared meanings. Yeah, so hey, this is the purpose. This is why we dated. This is why we married, and this is why we're making this thing work, because I'm helping you get to heaven, and you're helping me get to heaven. That's a true partnership, and it's the idea that, hey, our ultimate goal has nothing to do with this planet. It's everything past this planet. Well, you think about that if every day you could put everything that you did into the context of this is helping us meet our goal. Our ultimate goal is to get us and our kids to heaven. I can't think of a more powerful shared meaning. Now, the old statistic, and I haven't revisited in a long time, but religiously mixed couples, 7 out of every 10 religiously mixed couples fail. Now, if you want to put that in perspective, 1 out of every 10 people who tries to climb Everest dies. It's not the most dangerous mountain on the world. Annapurna is the most dangerous. It's 1 in 4. Who would do that? I have no. Anyway, but if you have 10 people who try to climb Everest, 1 of them won't make it back. And that's statistically, round some numbers up. Now, if you've got 10 couples and they are religiously mixed, they don't have the shared meaning of they're both not as conservative, or they're both not as dedicated, or they're both not as spiritual, 7 out of 10 of those will have difficulty making it as a couple. So this shared meaning. Now, if I've got a shared meaning, and we're talking about things spiritual, we're talking about things religious, we're talking about things with a Christian ethic, how much influence then does my spouse have on me, and how much influence do I have on my spouse if we've got this shared meaning? So when you read the passage that says, do not be unequally yoked together with unbelievers, we've abused that a little bit contextually, but the idea is of being unequally yoked. It's not actually an agricultural term. It doesn't have anything to do with oxen. It's a word that metaphorically means don't wear the uniform of the enemy. You can't have your allegiances so that when we walk out of our tents, you can't tell that I'm in your army, that I'm on your side. That's what the idea of unequally yoked means. You don't wear the uniform of the enemy. And so if you've got a couple that supposed to be Christians, and one of them you can't really tell is Christian in their thought, their deeds, and their values, how difficult is it for influence to be exchanged and shared? And then the other person says, hey, here's this major part of my life that is my ultimate goal, and you don't see any value in it at all. Can you see how true that statistic of 7 out of 10 religiously mixed marriages failing would be? And it boils down to the idea, hey, what do we share? So before the bell, and I heard one bell, and so I suspect there'll be another one. And you made reference to it earlier. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 21, submit to one another out of your reverence for Christ. And then it talks about wives and husbands and wives, and parents and children and parents, and masters and slaves and masters. And the dynamic is, hey, you have value and you have influence with each other because you're connected to Christ first. So I'm connected to Christ, Jackie's connected to Christ, therefore we have a special connection. Just like in a congregation, what holds us together is not the same political party, the same socioeconomic background, or the same football team. It's that we are connected to Christ, and our other differences don't matter because of that connection. And so if you superimpose upon your spouse that, hey, this is the most influential person I have in my life spiritually, what does that do for your closeness? What does that do for your intimacy? What does that do for your Christianity? And so accepting influence from your spouse really is the linchpin behind having a shared meaning in making your marriage tighter, closer, stronger, and the friendship better, on the simple idea that our shared meaning is, I'm going to let you influence me for good, I'm going to influence you for good. And if that dries up, is non-existent, or goes away, then your marriage is not going to be divorce-proof. In fact, I can almost predict divorce in a marriage like that. All right, so 2 more sessions before I have to be absent. If you've got questions or comments or things you'd like to revisit, or you just have something, hey, Lonnie, you hadn't talked about this, I wished you'd address it, then send me a text, send me an email, and we'll try to get it on our agenda, and then we'll wrap up our study. Thank you guys for being with us tonight.